Hi, I'm Barbara Rumkunis, and this is your Exeter History Minute. Of the dozen or so history writers of Exeter, Benjamin Franklin Swasey is probably the least known, which is a shame, because his writings are filled with delightful tidbits not generally found in most historical works. Benjamin Swasey was born in Exeter in 1837 and grew up on his father's farm on the west side of the Squamscott River. His younger brother, Ambrose Swasey, tends to overshadow him through his local philanthropy. We've done a whole series on Ambrose Swasey. Check it out. But for now, we're going to focus on Benjamin. Benjamin attended local schools before entering Phillips Exeter Academy in 1852 at the age of 15. From there, he studied at Brown. His first choice for an occupation was teaching, and he taught locally and even spent 5 years teaching in Illinois, the longest time he ever spent away from Exeter. When he returned east, he changed course and became a newspaperman at the Exeter Gazette and the Haverhill Bulletin. He also found the time to write a history of the Baptist Church in Exeter and the Swasey family genealogy. From 1907 until just before his death in 1914, Swasey wrote a series of articles for the Exeter newsletter called Notes on Early Exeter. They're mostly filled with genealogy and land ownership, but within these confines he included snippets of history that can be absolute gold to later researchers. Because he grew up here and, except for those few years, lived here his whole life, he knew the stories. In one of his first articles, he wrote about a 90-year-old man who said that he felt he'd lived twice the number of years his age indicated, because his own memories included those things that were told to him by his father, mother, and grandparents. Swasey must have felt a kinship with that old man's memory. He wrote about old burying grounds, pondered the location of Exeter's first meeting house. As he drafted his pieces, he often inserted reminiscences of the people who lived on the adjoining lands, people who were not necessarily the founding fathers of Exeter. From Swasey, we often get some of our best knowledge of Exeter's early black population. For instance, he wrote about the Mainjoy family. The father, he wrote, was brought to this country from Africa, a slave, by one of the Emery family. He recalled that a granddaughter of Mainjoy went on to marry the Reverend William Jason, the president of State College at Dover, Delaware. When we checked these anecdotes, he's right. Swasey's frequent reminders that black people lived in Exeter and often thrived belied the common belief that Exeter was always exclusively white. And he remembers people kindly, not the usual stereotypical way we find in so much turn-of-the-century writing. Of Mrs. Hussow may well be remembered by many families in Exeter as a kindly old lady whose services in their household were always appreciated. At leisure time in the fall of the year, she could periodically be seen picking barberries in the pastures of which years ago there was an abundance. He adds just enough information beyond that she worked as a domestic. His offerings included stories about women in town, whereas Charles Bell, a more formal history writer, rarely mentions women except to say that they were dutiful wives and mothers. Of Deborah Dutch, a woman who never married and had no children, the type of woman who gets left out of genealogy and history, he noted that she owned her own home. He also talked about how valuable she was to the community. She knew just the exact way to bring up children, how they should be clothed, how fed, and how educated, and was a great help to mothers who were in the business. She knew what best methods to adopt in the management of a household and how to deal with an unruly husband. Church fairs and church sociables were her delight, in which she always held an official position. Of this class of personages, and here he means unmarried women, nothing can be said in their disfavor. They are cheerful, hopeful, and their hope never wanes down to advancing years. Swasey was 11 at the time of her death, yet he remembered her with the highest regards. Trying to track down Exeter's built landscape can be difficult. For time periods before photographs, we have to depend on the town's maps, which often leave decades undocumented. Swasey fills in these details by describing homes and buildings street by street. The Hutchins Tavern was located where the post office stands today. The place was sold several times after its first appearance on the 1802 Phineas Merrill map. Swasey includes a hilarious anecdote about the daughters of one of the owners who, when left to run the tavern, tricked a group of customers by stuffing the sausages with flannel scraps to see their reaction. The roar of laughter that followed tells us that earlier townsfolk could appreciate a good joke. Most of the history we read can be dry. Benjamin Franklin Swasey managed somehow to continually write a balance of verifiable facts along with clever and entertaining vignettes of earlier days. I just love him. He lets us know that folks around here lived full lives that sometimes included a lot of wit and playfulness. Not exactly the harsh, stoic image we might have of many of our forebears. For more Exeter history, check out our website at www.exeterhistory.org.